Hello everybody, I'm Brainy Diode, and I am back with that video I promised where I go over every game I played in 2020 and what I thought of them. I also have actual footage for each game recorded this time, except for Just Cause 4 because that game did not want to let me record it for some reason. I originally planned to have this as a completely ranked list, but there are a heck of a lot of games on this list, both because of certain current events and also because I ended up playing a lot of shorter games this year. Anyway, that made determining actual rankings pretty difficult, so I decided to make this a tier list instead. I've organized each of these games by tier, from D tier to S tier, with the games in each tier organized by when I played them. I want to make it absolutely clear that these games are ordered by how much I enjoyed them, not how good I think they are. There are a lot of games on here that are incredibly well made, but didn't really align with my personal tastes. As a result, please don't take this as a recommendation against any of my low-rated games. Just because I don't like them doesn't mean that you won't. I have a feeling that this video will piss off some, possibly even a lot of people, but what's life without risks, right? One last point, this video will contain no story spoilers for any of these games, but some of the footage of them may show me in late game areas or with late game skills or equipment, although mostly without context. So if that is something you're sensitive to, you may want to either just listen to this video instead of watching it, or skip over the segments going over the games you plan on playing yourself. Anyway, without further ado, let's get this started with D tier. Celeste, Matt Makes Games 2018. Alright, starting off with a controversial pick. Celeste is a 2D platformer where you play as an anxious girl named Madeline as she chases self-actualization by climbing a mountain. In a desperate attempt to placate the people who are already disliking this video, I want to remind everyone that this list is based on how much I enjoyed the game, not how good I think the game is. When Celeste was released and everyone was talking about it, I said to myself, wow, that looks like a fantastic game that I wouldn't enjoy very much. Then I got a free copy and played it, and what do you know? It's a fantastic game that I didn't enjoy very much. It's beautiful, the mechanics are tight, and the level design is fantastic. I just don't like hard games or 2D platformers that much. Hub, Runic Games 2017. This is another pretty well-liked game as far as I can tell, so maybe this video wasn't a great idea. Hub is an action-adventure game not completely dissimilar to a top-down Zelda game, in which you play as a robot going on a somewhat ambiguous quest to purge corruption from the world. The game thrives off of three aspects: the combat, the puzzle-solving, and the exploration. To me, at least, the combat feels shallow and repetitive. Very few puzzles are more difficult than press this button to unlock another button you can go press, and the exploration feels lacking because there doesn't really seem to be much defined, and it also results in getting dragged into more shallow and repetitive combat encounters. I will give it credit for the subtle environmental storytelling and an ending that leaves a lot up to interpretation while still being mostly satisfying. I feel bad ragging on this game because I can tell there was a lot of love poured into it, but for me, it doesn't quite hit the mark. Figment, Bedtime Digital Games 2017. Figment is a game that I have very mixed feelings about. It feels like the skeleton of an indie masterpiece, but it just doesn't have nearly enough meat on its bones for me to call it that. Figment is a puzzle action game in which you play as Rusty, a defender of the mind, as he tracks down a photo album stolen from him by a group of fears who have invaded the mind. The first thing you'll notice when you start playing is that the art style is absolutely incredible. Not only that, but the actual environmental design is fantastic. The way each of the themes of the areas are integrated into the visuals and puzzles is simply incredible. The puzzle design, too, is pretty decent. Not fantastic. Several months after playing it, I don't remember a single one clearly, but the average puzzle in this game is certainly better than anything you'll find in Hob. Sorry, Hob. That's about where the good things I have to say about the game end, though. The combat is really bare bones, which is very disappointing considering how much you have to do it, but more frustratingly, the characters are, to me at least, really annoying and just won't shut up. That's honestly a lot of why I disliked this game. I just wanted the characters to stop talking every time they open their mouths. Maybe there's a setting somewhere to turn it off, but since the dialogue is pretty integral to the game's story, that doesn't seem like the best of plans. Ultimately, there's a lot of good in the game, but the bad outweighs it enough that it's just not a product I can recommend. Frog Fractions, Twinbeard Studios 2012. I think there's a strong argument to be made that the reason I didn't like this game a ton is because I didn't get it, heavy air quotes. Frog Fractions is, well, the genre is hard to pin down, mostly because it changes every few minutes, but I can definitely pin down that it's a metafictional parody of old internet Flash games. I guess that makes it fitting that I played it the last year of Flash's operation, but I digress. About 95% of the game's appeal is in its humor, most of which didn't really land with me. The game is free on Steam, and a full playthrough only takes about 90 minutes, so if what I've said so far interests you and your sense of humor is sufficiently different from mine, there's a pretty decent chance you'll like it more than I did. So don't take this as a recommendation to stay away from this game. C tier. Baba Is You, Hampuli Oi 2019. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Baba Is You is a puzzle game where you play as Baba or any number of increasingly insane game elements and move around words on the screen to create different sentences that change the rules of how the game works. I'll say once again, for the people in the back, that this list is based on how much I enjoyed these games, not how good I think they are. Unlike Figment, I can confidently say, without any reservation, that Baba Is You is an indie masterpiece, and the only reason it's hanging out in C tier is because a lot of the puzzles in this game are really difficult, and my tiny little pea brain couldn't handle about half of them. I fully intend to revisit this game someday and actually solve the puzzles for real this time, and I highly encourage you to do the same, if only so this game can be successful and inspire other people to make more crazy, out there games like it. I physically cannot overstate how important it is you know that my problems with this game were entirely problems with myself, and that the actual game is one of the most freaking fantastic games I played this year. Batman Arkham Asylum, Rocksteady Studios 2009. Oh boy. This list is very quickly turning into an exercise in pissing off as many people as possible. Batman Arkham Asylum is a beat-em-up in which you play as, well, Batman, as he gets trapped in, you guessed it, Arkham Asylum, and has to put a stop to Joker's latest evil scheme. I know this game is very well liked, but it just didn't land with me for some reason. Maybe it's because I'm not a huge Batman fan, so the iconography and references didn't really impact me at all. Maybe it's because I didn't appreciate the combat as much as a lot of other people. I really can't put my finger on an exact reason why. Sorry, people who love this game, but I'm not one of you. No Kuni, Wrath of the White Witch, Level 5 2019. Remaster of No Kuni, Domain of the Dark Djinn, Level 5 2011. And so it continues. No Kuni is a creature collector action JRPG in which you play as a young boy named Oliver, who is transported to a fantasy world he must save in order to bring his mother back to life in his own world. There's a plot justification for that, I promise. No Kuni famously has cutscenes created by the legendary Studio Ghibli, and yeah, for the most part, it does feel like playing a Studio Ghibli movie. If the game was about half as long as it is, it would have easily made A tier, maybe even S. Unfortunately, the game isn't about as half long as it is, and it was during the second half that what were minor annoyances at the start began to become a bigger and bigger part of the experience until by hour 40, sunk cost fallacy was literally the only thing keeping me going. There is just so much level grinding needed to make it through this game. Every time you gain a new familiar, it joins your party at level 1. Every time you metamorphosize a familiar, it resets to level 1. Couple that with a way too steep difficulty curve in the latter half of the game, and a combat system that, while unique, I didn't really find a ton of depth in once the novelty wore off. And you get an experience that's incredibly charming in the first half and incredibly tedious in the second. Unfortunately, it's the second half of the game that I remember most clearly, and it was frustrating enough to make this game a sufficiently sour experience that I can't bring myself to put in anything higher than C tier. Sonic Mania, Pagoda West Games 2017. Sonic Mania is a 2D platformer where you play as Sonic doing the things Sonic does. I feel like I probably shouldn't have to explain what goes on in a Sonic game. Given how much I praised Sonic Generations last year, you might be surprised to see this game so low on this list. But I'll be honest, most of what I love about Generations are the 3D levels. I'm just not that big a fan of 2D platformers. Sorry. I went into this one suspecting that I wouldn't enjoy it as much as Generations, and I was right, but that's not to say this is a bad game. Again, it's really down to my personal preferences. If you played Generations and fell in love with the classic levels, then yeah, you'll probably have a lot of fun with this game. I just find the issues with the 2D Sonic formula, which I will not go into right now because 1,000 people on this website can and have explained them better than I could. Too difficult to overlook for me to enjoy this game as much as I did Generations. Hyper Light Drifter, Heart Machine 2016. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to put this many great games this low on the list, honest. I just wanted to experience some games that other people have said good things about, even if I wasn't sure I would enjoy them, because sometimes stepping out of your comfort zone can be a good and enriching thing. I didn't go into any of these games wanting to hate them, and I honestly didn't hate a single game on this list, except maybe one of the honorable mentions, but we'll get to that. I can see the value in this game, I really can. It just didn't connect with me as much as it did with other people. I don't know why, I just didn't have a lot of fun with it. I want to talk about something else now. Just Cause 4, Avalanche Studios 2018. Now, this is one that I actually do have legitimate criticism of. Just Cause 4 is an open-world action game where you play as a mercenary named Rico Rodriguez, who is trying to take back the fictional island nation of Celeste from a dictatorial corporation. If you look at my two favorite games of all time, Breath of the Wild and Xenoblade 2, I think it becomes very obvious that one of the most important things to me in open world games is exploration and discovery. Being able to see something weird in the distance and go there and be rewarded. That just doesn't feel like it happens in this game. Part of the joy of moving around Just Cause 3's world was being able to drop in on an unsuspecting settlement, start blowing things up, and watching those quest objectives start being marked off one by one. With the change to how retaking settlements is handled in this game, just going around creating wanton destruction doesn't really feel like it accomplishes much, so the novelty runs out remarkably quickly. It wasn't long at all before I was just cynically moving from objective to finish the main plot, which is a far cry from how I played the last game. Sure, there are missions here and there, but when stuff I can pick up from defeated enemies makes the rewards from those side missions feel largely redundant, they don't really feel like they have much of a point either. Also, the performance saw a big drop-off in the last half of the game for me, and the game obnoxiously slowing down or stuttering in nearly every combat encounter certainly didn't help. I don't know if this is just an issue with my computer or my copy, but it definitely hampered what little enjoyment I was getting by that point even more. Despite a couple of set pieces that were actually really cool, when compared with 3, this simultaneously felt like more of the same and a pure downgrade, so I would definitely recommend that one over this. Oninaki Tokyo RPG Factory 2019. Oninaki is an action JRPG that sees you playing as a watcher, someone who can cross between the corporeal world and the spirit world as he, with the help of lost souls called demons, help the souls of the deceased find the afterlife so that they can be reincarnated instead of becoming lost themselves. Confession time, most of the time I spent with this game was time I had something else going on in the background, which is a really bad way to play a JRPG because I have barely any idea what happened in this game's plot. Maybe this game has a phenomenal story that I just didn't know about, and I may return to it someday to see if that's the case, but for now, I'm just going to talk about the gameplay. The gameplay is fine. I was pretty excited when I saw that the combat system seemed to be a simplified version of Xenoblade 2's. Remember that I just said it's my second favorite game ever, where you get to equip up to 3 demons that you can switch between during battle, each of which changes what techniques you have at your disposal. However, I quickly found out that without an obvious rock-paper-scissors system like in Xenoblade 2, there is no clear reason to not just master one of the demons' playstyle and stick with them for the entire game. Maybe this is my fault for optimizing the fun, or at least the depth out of the game, but I feel like having some sort of incentive to switch between demons during fights baked into the game shouldn't be too much to ask if the devs are going to make that a mechanic in the first place. Basically, what I'm saying is, aspiring game developers, keep in mind that if you have a cool mechanic but don't give your players a reason to use it, you might as well not have that mechanic at all. B tier. A Short Hike, Adam Griu, 2019. I'm very sorry for that pronunciation. Alright, getting to the good stuff. A Short Hike is a 3D open-world platformer where you play as an anthropomorphic bird at a summer camp she really does not want to be at, who decides to climb a mountain to get cell reception. The game is, as the title suggests, really short, with me finishing the main story and doing a bit of exploration around the camp in only about 80 minutes. But I think that length works wonders for what the game is going for. This is a crash course in character progression, both in a story and gameplay perspective, with me being able to jump 14 times consecutively and glide for minutes on end by the end of the game. The game is also extremely relaxing to play, and the 3D but pixely look the game has is also pretty unique and pretty charming. Ultimately, the only thing keeping this game from being higher on the list is that I tend to like my games a bit meatier content-wise, but if you're in the mood for a quick, easy, fun time, this is one I can easily recommend. Batman Arkham City, Rocksteady Studios 2011. Batman Arkham City is an open-world beat-em-up where you play as Batman after he gets arrested on false charges and thrown in the new maximum security prison, Arkham City. I know a lot of people favor Arkham Asylum over this game for executing the atmosphere better, but I find this one so much more fun to play. Grappling and gliding felt like a much bigger deal in this much more open environment, and taking out the goons from the shadows felt much more engaging to me this time without the game outright forcing me into frustrating stealth segments. As far as the story goes, forcing Batman to work with the Joker feels like an inherently more interesting premise to me than pitting them against each other, but I'm not really playing the game for the story. Like I said, Asylum nails the atmosphere it was going for, but in almost every other respect, I find City to be much more fun as a video game. Also, this one doesn't have that freaking Killer Croc boss fight, which is a big plus. Naissance, Limas 5, 2014. Now, if we want to talk about games with good atmosphere, I genuinely can't think of one that masters it as well as this one. Naissance is a game that lands somewhere between walking simulator and first-person platformer, and doesn't really have a story, not on the surface at least. There are plenty of different interpretations of what's going on here, but I'm not going to get into that. I honestly can't decide if I love this game or hate it, which has resulted in it landing almost exactly at the middle of the list. But don't mistake this placement for apathy. I feel neutrally towards this game, but I feel it very strongly. As a video game, it's not great, and can be downright frustrating far too frequently. But as a piece of art, wow. This might be a masterpiece, and I don't use that word lightly. I was so genuinely unsettled the entire time I played this game, despite not being a single enemy outside the final boss. Every second of this game made me feel tiny and powerless and like I didn't belong and so very alone, and I don't think I can possibly commend this game enough for that. Also, the game's aesthetic is very simple, but for what it is, I think it looks really stunning. The simplicity in its visuals is definitely a strength and not a detriment. And because what I've seen other people say about this game online makes me think that it's actually illegal to talk about this game without mentioning the wonky stare section. Yeah, that wonky stare section sure is crazy, huh? Naissance is free on Steam and only takes about 4 to 6 hours to get through, so if you're in the mood to be creeped out, there is very little reason not to give this game a shot. The Gardens Between, The Voxel Agents 2018. This is another weird game. The Gardens Between is a puzzle game about two childhood friends whose treehouse gets washed away in a thunderstorm, ferrying them off to a strange archipelago that allows them to relive many of their formative memories together. The gameplay is a little difficult to explain, but I'll do my best. Instead of playing as either of the two main characters, you control the flow of time as they explore the islands. with holding right causing time to advance, holding left causing time to rewind, and doing neither causing time to stay in place. This opens the door for a lot of really unique puzzles, but it also opens the door for a bit of a lack of clarity. For example, one puzzle earlier in the game requires you to pause time while one of the characters is standing on the rewind button on a giant TV remote, which causes a giant VHS tape to eventually pop out of a giant VCR, giving the characters a new platform to climb up onto to advance the level. But if time is frozen, shouldn't rewinding the tape do nothing? So we could say that changing the flow of time only affects the characters and not the inanimate objects, but that also isn't true, because objects that fall when time goes forward rise back up when time turns back. I feel like it's ultimately this lack of clarity regarding what is or isn't affected by the time shenanigans is ultimately what has the biggest negative impact on my opinion of this game. For the most part, this game has pretty solid puzzle design and changes up the scenarios enough to keep the gimmick feeling fresh the entire way through. Snake Pass, Sumo Digital 2017. Snake Pass is a 3D puzzle platformer where you play as a snake named Noodle as he tries to clean up the mess a mysteriously appearing bird has made of his magical forest home. If you haven't played or at least seen Snake Pass, it might not be immediately clear when I call this a puzzle platformer that I mean that the puzzle here is figuring out how to platform. Snake Pass is a weird physicsy game where you wrap around wooden stakes to climb higher and slither in a zigzag pattern to move faster, and there's a surprising amount of depth squeezed out of what appears on the surface to be a relatively small set of mechanics. The game's presentation also has a ton of charm to it, and Noodle is freaking adorable. Unfortunately, the movement controls don't always feel the best to me, making it difficult in a lot of cases to get the sort of precision the game requires in its later levels without going painfully slowly, which is the main reason why this game doesn't appear higher on the list, but all in all, it's a pretty solid experience. The Wonderful 101 Remastered. Platinum Games 2020, remaster of The Wonderful 101, Platinum Games 2013. This is one of only 2 games I played all the way through in 2020 that actually released in 2020, and they're both remasters of older games. The Wonderful 101 Remastered is a character action game that sees you playing as Wonder Red and the rest of the superhero organization, the Wonderful 100, as they fight off an alien invasion. I've seen this described as a combination of Pikmin, Okami, and Platinum's typical character action style, and yeah, that's pretty accurate. The gameplay is a little difficult to describe without just showing you, but basically you draw shapes on the screen to create weapons out of your squad, and use those to fight enemies. This was definitely a Wii U game, and the parts of this remaster where they had to condense the double screen mechanic into a single screen are pretty clunky and make that abundantly obvious, but those instances are few and far between, and I was actually very impressed by how good the game is at figuring out what you're trying to draw, despite drawing now being mapped to the right stick. This game's high points easily match some of the best stuff Platinum has ever made, but I feel like there were more instances of the game feeling frustrating and unfair than most of Platinum's work, where there are a few enemies that pop up a bit too frequently that feel like they take way too long to beat for no particularly good reason. This might be because I'm just not used to this gameplay style, and I definitely intend to return to this game someday to try to polish my skills, but I feel like I can't really recommend this to someone as an introduction to the character action genre. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Crystal Dynamics 2018. Despite what I said about Rise of the Tomb Raider last year, I decided to give this one a shot, and I'm glad I did, because it might just be the best game in the Tomb Raider reboot trilogy. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is an action game with light survival elements, where you play as the titular Tomb Raider, Lara Croft, after she accidentally awakens an artifact that will cause the apocalypse, sending her on a race against time to find its partner artifact, the only thing that can stop it. The crafting feels like more of an integral mechanic this time, while still being unintrusive, and the controls feel so much more refined than in Rise, and I found myself in awe of the game's visuals several times. Maybe this is because I'm a Nintendo fanboy, I'm not used to realistic-looking AAA games of today, but I think this game looks really good. The puzzles are a bit more prevalent in the main story than in the last two entries, but still not as much as I would like, although the puzzles that were here felt pretty well designed. And the combat still isn't really my jam, although one change that I really liked was the ability to change the difficulty of the combat and the puzzles independently of each other. The puzzle difficulty really only affects how explicit your hints are when you activate whatever this game's version of Detective Vision is called, but it's still a nice option to have. By far my biggest complaint, though, is that there isn't a set piece where you sneak past a giant undead army. I mean, is your Tomb Raider reboot game really a Tomb Raider reboot game if you don't sneak past a giant undead army? Control. Remedy Entertainment 2019. Control is a third-person shooter in which you play as a young woman named Jessie, who has finally fulfilled her lifelong goal of locating the shadowy Federal Bureau of Control, an organization dedicated to the study of the supernatural, only to suddenly find herself as its new director and on the front lines of a battle against an extra-dimensional hive mind. There's a lot of stuff I'd like to say about this story, but for the sake of brevity and keeping this video spoiler-free, I'll just say that it's serviceable, but a little disappointing, and move on to the gameplay. The gameplay is also, what do you know, serviceable, but a little disappointing. For the most part, it plays like a lot of other shooters that I've played, and I didn't really feel like it ever managed to deliver on the intense, crazy action that the trailers seem to promise. The supernatural abilities you gain throughout the course of the game don't, in general, turn out to be that useful, except for launch, which, except for a few very special circumstances, is functionally almost identical to a really strong gun. Ultimately, both in the story and gameplay, I feel that Control doesn't quite capitalize on the potential it has, and that's a shame, because I can tell there's something really good in there. A tier. Darksiders Warmastered, Vigil Games 2016, Remaster of Darksiders, Vigil Games 2010. Darksiders Warmastered is an action-adventure game in the vein of a 3D Zelda title where you play as War of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, after he is framed for releasing a demon that destroyed the world, and he must prove his loyalty to maintaining balance between heaven and hell by slaying said demon. Right out of the gate, I can confidently say that this game addresses two problems I had with pre-Breath of the Wild Zelda. First of all, they dealt with Zelda's convention of dungeon items being almost completely confined to the dungeon in which you obtain them, by making almost every dungeon item in this game useful in combat in some way. Got a boomerang? Throw it at enemies. Got a grappling hook? Pull enemies toward you. Got a strength gauntlet? Punch enemies away from you. And that ties into my second, admittedly more subjective complaint with the first several 3D Zeldas, that being that their combat was really slow and not particularly engaging. Not so here. This is a hack and slash through and through, and though it's not the best combat system in the world, it's a far cry from what you get in, say, Ocarina of Time. I do think, however, that your typical Zelda game does tend to be a bit stronger in the areas of world building, puzzle design, and visual style. Given the choice between a new Zelda and a new Darksiders, I'd pick the Zelda 9 times out of 10, but if you've already seen what 3D Zelda has to offer, or if you don't own any Nintendo consoles and are looking for something similar, you can certainly do worse. Untitled Goose Game, House 2019. You've heard of Untitled Goose Game, right? Everybody's heard of Untitled Goose Game. In case you haven't, it's a sandbox puzzle game in which you play as a horrible goose causing chaos in a cute little village. And if I had to sum up this game in one word, it would be just that. Cute. The art style is cute, the objectives are cute, the dedicated honk button is cute, everything is cute. This game is a little on the short side, and it's not really one I think about or yearn to boot back up when I'm not playing it, but when I am playing it, it's just pure, relaxing, goofy fun. Sonic and AllStars Racing Transformed, Sumo Digital 2012. Sonic and AllStars Racing Transformed, which I will refer to as Racing Transformed for the rest of this segment, is a racing game in which you play as Sonic, or one of several other Sega characters and beyond, and race. Like with Darksiders and Zelda, comparisons between this game and Mario Kart are inevitable. If you made me choose, I'd probably go with Mario Kart, since I think its tracks and items tend to be a little bit more fun, but Racing Transformed does have a few points in its favor. It sells the feeling of speed much more than Mario Kart. It's a Sonic game, what did you expect? And it includes a single-player campaign with a number of modes outside of normal racing. They're not modes I would choose over normal races too frequently, but the variety is nice. Speaking of variety, the transformation mechanic adds some extra flair to the tracks as well. Unfortunately, circumstances have made it so that I haven't actually been able to play this one in multiplayer yet, but I can't imagine having too much worse a time. If what you've heard sounds interesting and you like a good kart racer, this one is definitely worth a shot. Monster Hunter World, Capcom 2017. Monster Hunter World is an action game where you play as a monster hunter hunting monsters in a world. In all seriousness, I like me a good boss fight, and this is a game that focuses on boss fights above all else, and that's pretty cool to me. The combat system isn't too tough to get to grips with, but has just the right amount of depth to it, especially with so many different weapon types to tweak your gameplay style with. Like the Wonderful 101, this game's are really high, but its lows are really low, and the optimization portion of the game takes me out of the experience a little, which is why the game didn't quite reach S tier, but its ratio of highs to lows is a little more in this game's favor, which is why it's not quite as low on the list as the Wonderful 101. This isn't a game that I can see myself putting multiple hundreds of hours into, but once I finish the DLC and dive into the multiplayer aspects a bit more, I can definitely see this being one that I'll be picking up now and then for a long time to come. Titanfall 2, Respawn Entertainment 2016. Titanfall 2 is a sci-fi first-person shooter in which you play as a soldier marooned during an interplanetary war, who discovers that his enemies are developing a planet-destroying weapon, and must rendezvous with the rest of his forces to relay this information before they get the chance to use it. I still remember watching this game's opening cutscene, seeing all the insane things the pilot was doing, and thinking to myself incredulously that they had better actually sell this power fantasy when my character eventually got to that level of skill. But coming out the other side, I am so very happy to say that they absolutely did. I felt so dang cool playing this game, even though I'm really not very good at it. And because I'm pretty sure it's illegal to talk about this game on YouTube without bringing up the time travel level, yeah, the time travel level sure is crazy, huh? I've made it no secret that I'm not the biggest fan of shooters, but there is no question in my mind that if I did like shooters, putting this game in S tier would be the easiest decision of my life. And I think that it landing in A tier, despite me not liking shooters, is a testament to just how good this game is. Super Mario 3D All-Stars, Nintendo 2020. Remaster of Super Mario 64, Super Mario Sunshine, and Super Mario Galaxy, Nintendo 1996, 2002, and 2007. Well, here it is, the only other 2020 release on this list. Super Mario 3D All-Stars is an up-resed collection of Super Mario 64, Super Mario Sunshine, and Super Mario Galaxy, 3 games which I'm sure need no introduction. If you're watching this, you may have already seen my review of this collection, but I'll drop a link in the description in case you haven't. For now, suffice it to say that revisiting such significant pieces of gaming history and experiencing that warm wave of nostalgia was an absolute joy. Before I make it to S tier, like last year, I have some honorable mentions. These are games that I dropped for one reason or another that don't really have a clear end goal, or that I started too late into the year to fit on this list. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX Demo. I've never played a Mystery Dungeon game before, and this demo unfortunately didn't convince me to change that, despite how much I adore the art style. Monster Hunter Generations Demo. Yuck, I almost can't believe this series went straight from this into World. Now, that's what I call a glow-up. Ticket to Ride, a digital version of a popular board game. If you like the board game, you'll probably like this. If you don't like the board game, you probably won't like this. What else am I supposed to say? Tabletop Simulator. If there's any game that got me through quarantine more than any other, it's this. Already the most played game in my Steam library, so make of that what you will. Trials of Mana Demo. A fun, charming little action RPG. I wouldn't mind picking up the full version someday, but it's not too high on my priority list. Bravely Default 2 Demo. Just the first one. I haven't gotten around to the second yet. This one required way too much level grinding, and coming right off No Kuni, that was not something I was willing to deal with at the time. Shovel Knight King of Cards. I made it through every other Shovel Knight campaign, but playing this at an unfortunately long string of games I hadn't enjoyed very much, I quickly found myself wishing to be playing something else. So, I played something else. Captain Toad Treasure Tracker DLC. Not much to say about this, it's more Captain Toad Treasure Tracker. Not a bad experience, but not mind-blowing either. Genshin Impact. Despite how excited I was for this one before release, I haven't actually gotten around to it since my original impressions video. As such, my thoughts haven't changed much since then. I'll drop a link in the description. Among Us. That this is on the list should be totally unsurprising. It's a fine enough social deception game for what it is, but in person will always be the far superior social deception experience to me. Jackbox Party Pack 7. This might just be the best pack the Jackbox team has ever made. Enough said. Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. I mentioned earlier that the sequel is my second favorite game ever, but I've never actually played the original. It's a big game, and I'm working my way through it slowly. I don't think it'll replace 2 as one of my favorites, but it's certainly an experience I'm glad to be having. Fury. Another very difficult game, but whereas Celeste was very interested in not wasting my time, that certainly didn't seem to be the case with Fury, which is why I could make it through Celeste, but just could not force myself through this one. Paper Mario: The Origami King. I got this game for Christmas, so I haven't had time to play it all yet. Based on what I've played so far, if I do another tier list next year, I can see this one being an easy A tier. And now, on to S tier. Danganronpa V3, Spike Chunsoft 2017. Danganronpa V3 is a visual novel / puzzle game about Kaede Akamatsu, the ultimate pianist, who gets trapped in a murder high school with 15 other students where the only way to escape is to kill and get away with it. It's the third game in the main Danganronpa series, not to be confused with Danganronpa 3, which is an anime that ties up the events of Danganronpa 1 and 2. Danganronpa V3 is sort of a soft reboot of the series, but also kinda not. Listen, it's complicated. V3 was the first main series game designed with home consoles in mind after the first two were developed for handhelds and ported over later, and holy cow does it show. This is the best the series has ever looked by a wide margin, and for a visual novel, that's not nothing. It also has the wildest and most interesting murder schemes the series has ever seen. If you're like me, though, it's the characters that make or break a Danganronpa game for you, and I didn't quite fall in love with this cast as much as the second games, so it hasn't supplanted 2 as my favorite entry in the series, but there's still a lot of fun to be had here. And if you like mysteries and can deal with some cheesiness, this is an easy recommendation from me.
Whoa!
Hitman 2, IO Interactive 2018. Hitman 2 is a stealth action sandbox in which you play as the incredibly talented assassin Agent 47, as he goes around, assassinating people. When I played Hitman 1 back in 2019, I have to admit I was just the slightest bit let down. After the experience I had with the first game, going into the second, I promised myself that I wouldn't use a single mission story in my first playthrough. Imposing that simple restriction on myself made it painfully clear just how much my own playstyle had impeded my enjoyment of Hitman 1, because as I was forced to really explore and understand each level, take risks, and get creative with how I isolated myself with my target, and commit to seeing the consequences of my mistakes through, I gained a whole new level of respect for this series, and had so much more fun doing it. Now, whenever I go back to Hitman, I choose a level from the second game far more often than from the first. But whether that's because the level design has actually improved, or because I simply had better first impressions of them, I couldn't say. What I can say is that there are very few games I've seen that contain such a wide array of options as this one. My thirst for exploration and discovery was more than quenched by this game, because if you think even one single thing in any given level is useless, I promise that's because you're just not thinking hard enough or creatively enough. There aren't many games on this list that gave me this much difficulty defining a genre, because Hitman is one of the few series that makes me think there's never been another game like this. And I've barely scratched the surface of all the game's content. Hitman 2 is a game that I can tell will have me coming back to it for years to come. Rayman Legends, Ubisoft 2013. Rayman Legends is a 2D platformer in which you play as Rayman and/or one of his various friends and allies to explore the world and rescue the peaceful people known as teensies. I don't like 2D platformers very much. Is not something I feel like I can really say anymore, given how delightful of an experience I had with this game. There's an ongoing debate over whether video games are art. For the record, they are. And if I ever got to sit down with someone who thinks they're not, and had to pick just one game to get them to change their mind, this is a very strong contender. It just feels amazing. The movement feels delightful, and the animation and sound design make every jump every sprint, every attack feels so satisfying. And that's to say nothing of the absolutely gorgeous visual style. And to top it all off, a pretty hefty percentage of the prequel Rayman Origins is playable here as well. And playing through those levels for the second time, I played Origins years ago, not too long after it first came out, showed me just how superior of a game Legends is in almost every respect. They made a water world one of the best in the game, for Pete's sake, and that's not an insult to the rest of it. If you like 2D platformers even a little, you owe it to yourself to play this game. Even if you don't, I urge you not to discount it. It certainly won me over. Spyro Reignited Trilogy, Toys for Bob 2018. Remake of Spyro the Dragon, Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage, and Spyro Year of the Dragon, Insomniac Games 1998, 1999, and 2000. The Spyro Reignited Trilogy is a collection of remakes of the original Spyro 3D platformers, in which you play as Spyro, as he goes on a series of journeys to save the world of dragons. Playing the Reignited Trilogy and Super Mario 3D AllStars in the same year gave me an interesting lens to look at the different approaches of these two platforming rivals. Whereas Super Mario 64, Sunshine, and Galaxy are all very distinct games, in a lot of ways Spyro 2 feels like they took Spyro 1 and made it better, and Year of the Dragon feels like it does the same for Spyro 2. I get the impression that this isn't a very popular opinion, but I really do think that each of these games is better than the last. Spyro the Dragon isn't a bad game by any means, but it felt a bit basic, for lack of a better word. I wouldn't call the level designs or theming bland, but they certainly weren't particularly exciting either. This improved a lot over the course of the trilogy, especially with Year of the Dragon feeling like a full-on world tour. The controls felt incredibly tight throughout, and Spyro's moveset was simple but very effective. The game never gets particularly difficult either, which may be a turn-off for some, but for me it just made it very relaxing and a wonderful way to unwind. As someone who only played bits and pieces of Spyro 1 as a kid, this remake collection definitely convinced me that the hype behind these games was totally deserved. Devil May Cry 5, Capcom 2019. Devil May Cry 5 is a character action game that sees you playing as demon hunters Dante and Nero and their mysterious new ally V as they try to dethrone the demon king Urizen. This may be surprising to those of you who are aware of how much I love Platinum Games, creators of DMC's main rival Bayonetta, but this is actually my first foray into the Devil May Cry series, and what an introduction it was. Despite this game releasing more than a decade after Devil May Cry 4, the story features a lot of callbacks to previous games, leaving me more than a little lost a few times, but the overall plot is pretty easy for a newcomer to follow. But nobody plays these types of games for the story. The gameplay in Devil May Cry 5 is top-notch. Each character gives you so many options, they all look and feel great, and tying the combat music to the game's ranking system was a fantastic way of subconsciously pushing me to make use of as many of them as possible as I mowed through demons. This game, despite being pretty tough at times, made me feel so darn cool, and really, that's all I ask for from this genre. Not really much else to say without diving into each of the characters individually. Congratulations, Devil May Cry, you've certainly made a fan out of me. And this is the part where I admit that I've been a little untruthful with you. Back when I planned to do this as a ranked list, I was very confident of which game I played in 2020 I liked the most. And despite playing some really darn good games since then, that opinion has not changed. I think this game deserves to be put in a special position, so I'm doing just that. without further ado, my absolute favorite game that I played for the first time in 2020, Yakuza Zero, Sega 2015. Yakuza Zero is a beat-em-up with JRPG elements that sees you switching back and forth between two former Yakuza members, Kazuma Kiryu and Goro Majima, as they are both dragged into a complex web of secrets, conspiracies, and betrayals, Kiryu by being framed for a murder, and Majima by being ordered to commit one. You know, beat-em-ups aren't really a genre I associate with having a particularly strong story, but without exaggeration, Yakuza Zero may very well have my favorite story I've seen in a video game ever. And frankly, one of my favorite stories I've seen in fiction ever. The game manages to jump between goofy absurdity and tense drama quite frequently, without feeling forced or jarring. And the members of the main cast are all fantastically well realized. But lest I get so caught up in singing the story's praises that I forget the gameplay, don't worry, that's absolutely fantastic as well. The combat is fast, flashy, and surprisingly deep. Both characters have 3 different fighting styles gained through the main story, and a 4th optional one, each of which comes with its own moveset, and with the game giving you the ability to switch between these styles during combat, there is equal opportunity to experiment with your different options, or to find your niche and stick with it. I'd love to tell you all about the optional content as well, but truth be told, this world feels so packed with things to do that I feel like I've barely scratched the surface of it. What I have experienced, though, is all wacky and fun and feels entirely unique. I almost feel like downloading this game to get footage for this video was a mistake, because despite the daunting size of my gaming backlog, as soon as this video is done, I intend to boot this game up and play through the main story again. Frankly, I can't wait. And I also can't wait to see what the rest of this series has to offer. If you haven't played this game yet, it goes on sale on Steam relatively frequently, so I highly recommend you pay attention and pick it up at some point. I may not have had a ton of time to let my experience with Yakuza Zero simmer in my mind yet, but I can confidently say that it is not only my favorite game I played for the first time in 2020, but one of my favorite games of all time. So, that's what I played and liked over the past 12 months, or I guess it's closer to 13 months now. I hope there's been at least 1 or 2 games in this list that caught your interest and sound like something you want to try yourself. And I can't wait to see what kind of games I play in the coming year and share them with you again. Have a great rest of your day and great rest of your year. And I'll talk to you again soon.